This rectangular tool is the key to making the small covered jar. It starts, as all do, with the centering. I use about 1.5 pounds of clay, and I try to make it from the beginning kind of a dome shape, because things that you're going to close, you can't just make a straight cylinder and expect it to turn into a nice dome shape. So as I'm shaping it, I'm kind of thinking dome every time. Even though it's mostly a cylinder, it's curving in a little bit at the top. You never want it to get too wide when you're going to try to close a form. Do a couple of pulls, keep the walls fairly thick, or else it's going to wobble for sure on you. Get your hands good and wet and the surface really wet inside, inside removing the water, but outside you want to keep it good and wet whenever you collar in a pot. If it's too uneven, you're going to want to clean up that part before you close it. As it is, you can usually close it, but it will leave a bit of a dimple that will need compressing inside and out later to prevent cracking. Then I go along with the rib to smooth it off, paying special attention to keep it straight up and down so that the top and the bottom will be the same diameter and won't look like they don't fit each other. One of the advantages of this way of making them is normally they do fit pretty well because they're made in one piece. After the pot is shaped on the outside, the only important thing is to use this rectangular piece to make a rectangular groove by pushing the clay inward, not so much chiseling into it, but pushing the clay inward, smoothing it off with a finger. So when the pot is leather hard, it's just a matter of getting it centered, putting some pats of clay to hold it really well, and getting it ready to cut the lid and the bottom apart. When I make the lids, I like to not have any narrow parts on it because the lid gets set down and can easily be broken. So I cut it at the top with a needle tool at the top of the groove that we've made, which leaves the lid nice and thick, in fact too thick. The first thing to do is to recenter it using the clay on the bottom as a chuck, and to trim some of that extra thickness off the top so that it will fit. So using a small loop tool, I'm going to trim some of the clay on the inside, and I may have to trim a little bit on the outside or smooth it with a chamois as well. Now you can see this part looks pretty much like a mess, although it can be, as long as the clay is still leather hard, you can do a lot of work with it by getting it wet again. And here I'm pushing it in a little bit with the chamois, as well as making a nice channel type top by pushing in with a thumbnail. This little bump on the inside there will keep the lid from slipping off from side to side. Now I set it on in place to make sure it fits okay, and I'm going to leave it that way. Usually in drying it's going to stick, so you have to wait till it's bisque to disconnect it. Beyond that, it's just a matter of cleaning up the bottom and signing as with any pot. You'll want to think about using wax resist to keep the lid from sticking to the body of the pot when you're done. The honey or jam jar is another small covered jar made in 2 pieces. Not that different from the big ones, but you make a lot more of them, and you can make the lid in 1 piece instead of 2. Start by making the bottom of the jar, though, making a cylinder, splitting the lip in order to make a sill for the lid to fit on. I'm splitting it there with this sharp trim-a-foot tool, smoothing it off and shaping it, bellying out the form to get the kind of size and shape that you want. Always maintaining that it's going to be perfectly round and measuring for size. This is another one where I'll usually make a row of the bottoms and then a row of lids, and I'll fit the lids afterwards, not individually so much. Small pots always can be taken off with pot lifts, but if you're worried about deformation, it's better to leave it on a bat. And certainly things that have lids on it, you don't want them to be wobbly or out of round. Now the lid is made from about a quarter of the weight that the pot is made from. For instance, if you make the jar from about a pound, you might use a quarter pound for the lid. It's just a matter of leaving a little bump in the middle and pushing out the rest of it into a flat shape, and pinching in to make sure it's a knob that can be easily picked up with the fingers, and then again measuring for the fit. There are no special tricks to the trimming of a small jar, except you don't want to have a sharp bit on the bottom, so it's nice to have it nice and rounded. When you want the lid to fit, you do want to have a little bit of looseness in it in case the pot it can get deformed at any point in the process, including the final glaze firing. So if it's tight at all, you may want to go around just lightly with a tool. You're also going to have to clean up any rough edges, which you can do just about as fast by hand as trying to do it on the wheel. Now I do use a special little piece of metal bent over in a U shape to cut out the lid. If you try doing it with a needle tool, you're pretty likely to crack it, and a cookie cutter type cutter like this does a better job of taking a notch out of it, but it still needs a little cleaning up with a loop tool.